Borodar, salam alaikum, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here presenting this morning. I've sat down in front of many lectures here and almost dreaded the day that it was going to be my turn. So I've given this presentation some considerable thought, and really what you will have access to over the next few weeks, thanks to the Director of Sports Science and Higher Management support, is a lot of quite mechanistic and technical information on how sports nutrition has an impact on injury and performance. So I was very conscious today that I didn't want to overload it with even more. So what I thought about presenting this morning was something that I'm hugely passionate about. And that's the area of athlete health to do with nutrition. Why do I want to present on it? Well, I think generally it's an area that's done really poorly in my discipline across the globe. I think these days people are so hell-bent on things like medals and elite performance. I think sometimes people forget about the fundamental basis of why we actually work with athletes, and that's to try and improve their health, which ultimately may have a knock-on effect to their performance. As Matthew kind of said, I'm doing some postgraduate studies at the moment, and one of the really interesting themes to come out of some of the work I'm looking at is athlete stress. So it's linked to athlete health. But essentially, what a lot of the literature that I'm looking at is showing is that nutrition is one of the highest reasons for athletes to be stressed, both inside and outside of competition. So it's the real rationale for my studies at the moment, and a dissertation which is looking at management competencies within leadership in my discipline of sports and performance nutrition, to see if we can try and improve that area to try and reduce athlete stress and therefore help improve their health. For the millennials amongst us, I'm not quite sure how many they are, what's also interesting with some of my reading is there's not this thing. These days, if you put this into the internet, it comes up with a wiki, or what I know is. So if you put athlete health and sports nutrition into that, nothing comes up. So what I'm going to propose to do today is look at athlete health and sports nutrition from a number of different angles, both from within my profession, try and look at it from the athlete perspective, look at it from the food industry perspective, and also just chuck in bits of my experience along the way. And in doing so, what I hope to do is provide a little bit of richness into this area, which I guess some people call expertise. But hopefully by the end of it, I'll be able to create a little bit of or contribute towards a wiki in this sort of area. Like all good sessions, we've got to have some learning objectives. So these are my learning objectives. I've tried to focus on a couple of key themes which I think are quite topical. And my goal is to really try and paint a picture of sports nutrition and health, and look at a little bit of a journey across this topic. You will see a fair amount of imagery in this presentation, and it's just to say I've got no sort of interest in any of the companies that you see at all. So Dr. Paul, I've ticked the boxes. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. So why is it interesting to us? So, well, for me as a practitioner, when you look at the word health and then you throw the word performance in, do the two really actually go together? And I've been involved in a lot of team sports and individual sports, and any way you look at it, the two don't really seem to go together very well. And from some of the work that I did with the military, I think they summarize some of the problems very well in one word, and that word is burden. You know, what are the consequences of performance, you know, on health? And when you look at all of those things, you can pretty much guess there's a pretty big burden. Now, I've got my own experience with this. So in fine tradition of the Tuesday lecture, I've put the the horrible photo up. So what happened next? This is a lady that was going to get smashed in the face. That lady is called Kate Richardson Walsh, who I work with British Hockey, and this was the last minute of a game versus Japan in the London Olympics. And the reason why it's quite important for me as a practitioner is this is kind of a ding moment, if you like, a light bulb moment within my practice. And this is very much a case where a performance approach using sports nutrition, which is very different to that within health. The performance approach that we were using with this athlete and a group of athletes switched very quickly to the health side of things. Namely, this is an athlete whose sport plays 7 games in 11 days. She's the captain. As a result of this contact, she fractured her jaw. She had to have her jaw wired, couldn't move her mouth. But basically, this athlete was back on the field of play within 3 days competing. So very much my role as a practitioner went from performance to health literally overnight in a very, very, very complex situation. And what it taught me as a practitioner is that sometimes, we like the glamour and the lights of performance and science, but actually you can really support people to that performance side by just doing the health things really, really well. And in Kate's case, it was really trying to get calories into her to help promote her healing, to recover from matches, to help her keep performing in this tournament as a key player. So that's just a little bit of an insight into some of the experiences that I've got between the performance and the health sort of continuum. Where's a good place to start when we look at asking the question? Well, like all good scholars, we need to start in Google. So when you put this in, there's a lot of different stuff which comes up, and it was a bit of a surprise, to be honest, when I first started looking at this. And a surprise in that a lot of the literature is based around life expectancy. And a lot of the work that has been done by the sort of the Scandinavian cohorts, really. And if I look to kind of summarize some of that, just to give a bit of preamble before we move into nutrition, a lot of the evidence would suggest that endurance kind of sports have a longer life expectancy through reduced cardiovascular sort of risk than sort of power sports and team sports. There's large numbers, big cohorts over long periods of time. But what it does, it starts to look at different aspects of health. Because I've talked to a lot of people about sort of the word health and what they perceive about sports nutrition. And the same question keeps coming back. Well, what do you mean by health? I think it's a really good question. So it's really interesting for me as I walk through the literature to look at all these different avenues that are starting to come out about the word athlete health. So more recently, we've got the quality of life kind of scenarios coming up in different sports, for example, joints, musculoskeletal stuff in rugby. We've got mental health, the depression, the concussion side of things starting to really come through. And recently we've had the oral health symposiums with Dr. Mohammed here and other colleagues in his profession clearly identifying the issues to do with oral health in that profession. So there's a lot going on in terms of athlete health, a lot going on. But that's the generic athlete. What about the health of our athletes? So I can't say Qatari athletes as such because our athlete population is made up of a lot of different athletes, as you know. So what I want to try and do is just approach this as a broad spectrum and try and draw together some of the literature that's been actually published by some well-respected colleagues in the audience, but done in a way which it's been done in isolation. So what I want to try and do is pull this together to give a quick snapshot of what the sort of health situation is in our athletes to see if we're on the same page. So when we look at some basic characteristics of our athletes in Qatar, we can see there's differences in weight. Okay, we can see there's differences in how lean certain groups of athletes are and how heavy certain groups of athletes are and how much muscle mass that certain groups carry. So straight away there's a difference in somatotype, and there's a difference in the sort of the characteristics of the athletes that we deal with. So what health burdens do our Qatari-based athletes have? So just working through a little bit at a time, really. One of the biggest shocks, I was in a scientific subcommittee probably the best part of 16 months ago, Matt, something like that. And Matt did a presentation looking at shisha smoking, a bit of research looking at shisha smoking and air quality. And at the time, Matt presented some stats to show these figures here, which he's kindly given me to demonstrate today, which really showed that back in 2005, we didn't have one day in Qatar that was classed as good in terms of air quality. And at that time, Qatar was the 12th most polluted city in the world. Unfortunately to report, that's one league that we are going up in, and we're now actually second in the world behind Pakistan, according to the latest figures. So, our athletes, before anything else, they train in a really, really polluted environment. So that's got some health consequences. Some work that Matthew and his colleagues have done have shown the incidence of smoking in our athletes. An ex-colleague of mine, together with Nathan Riding, have shown the incidence of vitamin D. I'm grateful for Marco Cardinali from Aspire Academy just to share some details, some snapshot details about the prevalence of iron deficiency in our young athletes who are in Aspire Academy. We've got quite a lot of hypertensive things going on here with our athletes. With lipids, they are hyperlipidemic. We have an issue to do with not only total cholesterol, but low HDL and high LDL in a lot of our athletes. And we see a lot of that sort of picture coming through our outpatients. We've got a strong family history in our athletes of cardiovascular disease risk factors. And thrown into that mix, we have Ramadan, and from conversations again with sort of colleagues, experts in those fields, and evidence, Ramadan is something which actually makes some of these factors even worse at different times of the year. So we've got a lot going on with the health of our athletes. So what I wanted to then do is well, how does that compare to other places? So I presented at a conference a few months ago, and it was to a group of dentists, dietitians, some doctors, and my topic was literally on this. It was on athlete health and sports nutrition, and what I wanted to do is capture a snapshot of, well, what are our health issues in our practice in Qatar, like with the UK. So I did, basically, before I presented at that conference, I did an online questionnaire, and I got only focused on my colleagues in sports nutrition and dietetics who are registered. And out of 150 on the register, I got a 68 response rate, which was okay. And I asked these 4 questions, and essentially what it gave me was the fact that everyone thought there was a consensus that sports nutrition had a role to play on improving athlete health in a number of different ways. But the most important part, and why I wanted to show you this slide, is the differences in the challenges that we get as practitioners. So, for example, in the UK, when we looked at this question, what were the major health issues faced? These are the answers, the top 5 answers that were given in the UK. When you compare that to actually our Qatar-based athletes, that's quite significantly different. So there are cultural sensitivities around the health of athletes. And that's why I think really, and what I want to do for the remaining part of this session is just try and focus as much as I can on our Qatari-based athletes, rather than looking overseas. And if I can't answer those questions on our Qatari-based athletes, then I think that's actually a really positive thing, because it gives us a real avenue to go and look at and find those answers, which are really important to inform our practice. So the first take-home message that we've got is that our Qatari athletes cannot outrun a bad diet. you may remember in a lecture here, Robert Salas a few months ago, and he asked the question and he did a presentation on, can you outrun a bad diet, in terms of obesity? But really, based on the evidence I've presented you in the first few slides and the picture of our athletes, they can't outrun it. They need to address it. So how do we address it? Well, in my opinion, and to set the scene, I think we need to be doing more health-related things better. I don't think my job is about performance. I think it's actually making the health of our athletes, trying to make the health of our athletes better by working with you guys. There's a key learning point though, and I think, and it's a really significant one, and we have to learn from our colleagues in exercise in medicine especially, is we're not just talking about small numbers here, we're talking big numbers. How do you go about changing big numbers of habits and behaviors? It's a very, very complex thing to do. And for me, again, as a practitioner, that's the biggest cultural difference that I've experienced so far in Qatar, is you may get some of the health issues that I've shown you in our athletes in snapshots in British athletes and European athletes, but actually you don't get those in the numbers that we've got here. So we need to do something, and we need to do it pretty consistently and quickly. So now onto the nutrition part, and what I want to try and do is to try and help this flow quite well is present this using a bit of my MBA learning, which is looking at it in a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats kind of situation. Okay, and then hopefully that will drive some discussion at the end of it. Okay, so starting with the strengths. So this is a kind of a cartoon journey of my life and my journey as a practitioner so far. The red dots are basically indicators for me of where I can honestly say within my practice I've seen sports nutrition having a positive impact on athlete health, the athletes that I've been working with. So through case studies I can kind of prove it. And essentially, if I were to put a list together, they would be the areas within my practice. The ones that I've highlighted are the ones that I think are directly relevant for this particular environment and the current group of athletes that I work with. Okay. What's really encouraging is the impact that food is starting to make and be proven to make on the health of our athletes. Working across various different countries, supplements are a go-to mindset for a lot of people to start the ball rolling when we talk about, athlete health. Give them a supplement, give them a tablet. It'll achieve everything we need to. We don't need to worry about it. This was basically a bit of work that we did in one of the football clubs that I used to work with a few years ago. And essentially this was an infographic which their marketing department worked with me to draw up to try and improve athletes' habits, to include different foods where possible based on different things that the athletes may be struggling with at any one time. So some of it was evidence-based, and I'm going to be completely honest. Some of it is not evidence-based, but we were just trying to actually encourage a lot more variety in their diet. So how has science moved on? I mean, this was 2012, 2013 that I was working, 2011, 2012 I was working with Leicester City. So how has science moved on? Well, it's moved on really well. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so passionate to try and put on this sports nutrition symposium in the next couple of weeks, to try and show a line of sight between not only nutrition, sports nutrition and injury, but sports nutrition and performance. And if I were to pick kind of 4 areas that have really started to make a difference, these would be it. So It's the effect of good fats on kind of brain function, number one. Just through talking with colleagues here, like Dr. Lee Taylor, who's here today, you know, in his work in the research of sort of the gastro side of things is absolutely fascinating and starting to become very, very, very interesting and practical in terms of interventions that we can give our athletes for athlete health. You're going to hear a lot more around this side of things over the next few weeks with Keith Barr, who's one of the visiting professionals coming to support the day. And just this week this has been released, which has got very, very significant implications for the work that we do, not only here but also in Aspire Academy with the young boys, to try and reduce the risk of sort of bony injuries as well. So things are really, really progressing. And I'm really glad to say that the food theme continues to progress in the literature as well on how we can help athlete health. So again, this is a recent study showing how you can change. These are short chain carbohydrates, very, very rapidly fermentable carbohydrates contained in various foods, which you see here. And a lot of work now is starting to be done by a guy called Trent Stellingworth, looking at how we can change athlete diets to not only improve just day-to-day GI symptoms, which are quite underreported in the athletes, but a significant concern that we're led to believe, but also perhaps GI symptoms during exercise as well. And for those of you who are interested, there is actually a low FODMAP diet app as well. If you go onto iTunes, you can search it and it will give you some simple swaps. So it's really good and it's really practical way that we can help our athletes, not only in terms of performance, because obviously this particular study didn't show any performance effects, but actually in terms of our athlete health, how we can just help their day-to-day quality of life, which is really important. Continuing on the food theme, there's more and more evidence coming out about the need to periodize your nutrition. And this is the first sort of what I would call, what's the word, debatable area I'd like to throw out to you for discussion. You know, are we really there with performance with our athletes? You know, for nutrition, this is performance. Periodizing nutrition, using different dietary techniques across various different weeks in an approach to a competition or to get a training adaptation. Are we really there with our athletes? Because it takes all of this to do nutrition periodization, and I don't believe we've got that. So very much this adds an argument to what I'm suggesting, is that as practitioners within nutrition, our role and the best role that we can have is to try and focus on the health, improving the health of the athletes, because performance, to get a performance effect through nutrition, a clear performance effect through adaptation, takes significant commitment. So a bit of conjecture. What does the evidence say? There's quite a lot actually when you start to look at it about the positive effects that sports nutrition can have on health. Again, I haven't been involved, I'm not an expert in any of these things. The only thing I have been involved in that will be coming out next year is a position statement from within the UK to do with oral health and performance, that looks at the effect of things like supplements and sports drinks and the sugars contained in them on the effect of oral health in athletes. But there's a lot of evidence now, there's a lot of weight behind the fact that sports nutrition can impact athlete health. What about my practice? What do I do? What can I do? What should I do in terms of what the picture of our health in our Qatari-based athletes is? What are the options? Well, I've tried to kind of highlight those as best I can, really. For our hypertensives, there's good evidence for using things like beetroot juice on a daily basis, which does have a potential performance effect as well, but it does definitely have a health effect. For our pollution and our smokers, we could be looking at certain vitamins. Obviously, where you've got diagnosed specific deficiencies, we could be using specific interventions to treat those, and we are. By definition, the athlete population in this country has a low intake of good fats. We know good fats have an important impact on brain health, so this is something that we could be doing. And also in terms of a respiratory side of things, the probiotics could start to have a real impact at certain times of the year when there's changing temperatures. So that's my practice, but we've also got to be cautious of the literature as well. So this is something that's come out in the last few days. A real push towards this thing, glutamine, which has been around for a considerable amount of time, but now resurfacing again in the literature. But again, from discussions with colleagues, and I'm grateful for Lee for sharing this, you know, what may be presented on one hand necessarily isn't true on another. So we have to be very, very careful in how we interpret some of these supplements with the risk that they might possess from an adverse finding in a doping situation. Is the risk, you know, is the benefit greater than the risk? So my take-home message number 2, really, to carry on from number 1, is that let's do the basics well, and let's do it, you know, let's do certain things at targeted times to get some benefits for our health, for the health of our athletes. Okay, let's not think performance, let's keep thinking health, and let's look at certain times where we know we can make a difference. Because we can make a difference. And I keep saying that because we can make a difference. And I want to go into the weaknesses now of sports nutrition to try and show, you know, where some of these, where we struggle in sports nutrition. But again, through continued collaboration, how we can overcome some of those challenges to keep helping the athletes be healthy. A significant problem, a significant weakness, if you like, with sports nutrition is the athlete themselves. They have to take, in many cases, a lot of sugar substances, energy-dense, nutrient-empty nutrition to try and support their energy needs, specifically in very, very hard periods of time where the training leading up to major competitions is very intense. We know for a fact that supplements and drinks, like sports drinks, have a negative effect on the oral health, and also inflammation in joints, muscles as well, when you read some of the evidence. And unfortunately, you know, with our athletes, you know, you can educate to the most that you want, but actually the transfer of that knowledge into what they actually do is very minimal. So that's for sure one weakness is our athletes. The second weakness is actually a strange one, I think, really. You know, cultural diversity is a strength within Aspetar, but actually in some cases it can be a weakness. You know, if we're not all saying the same thing, the messages are going to get very confusing, and we're never going to be able to change or impact properly on the health of the athletes. So to use kind of to rip off one of Dr. Paul's slides from a few months ago, I really like this in terms of the old Khalifa Stadium, it being built. But really, one man's performance is another person's health. And I'm very much coming at the fact that really, for nutrition, outside of a very few outliers, we don't really do this, we don't really need this. The biggest impact that we can have with our athlete population is actually doing that and doing the basics well to bridge this gap between the two areas. And how we're doing that? Well, this is a small plug, but you know, we're trying to create opportunities for people to come, listen, share knowledge, debate knowledge, and also, you know, walk away with key messages to help with that consistency. We're also trying to understand not only the athletes, but we're also trying to understand our culturally diverse population as well of practitioners, both in Aspetar and in the GCC, to find out what you think and therefore put our education around that, to be very focused and time effective in what we're doing with you guys, where you're very, very under the cosh with work and your own time pressures. The third area we struggle with in nutrition is this area of personalization. There's no doubt that personalized nutrition is going to be where things are going. People like to believe we're there right now, and do you know what? We're not when you compare it to other disciplines. Okay, and a big issue that we have, a big weakness we have, not so much just in sports nutrition within Aspetar, but in the whole context of the discipline, is where we get our proper information from. And what that information means. So I've been, kind enough to have some information shared from me from podiatry and ESSD, and a few other kind of places here to try and put a message over. And that message is, we all have our own ways of identifying something. Okay, whether it's foot pressure for the podiatrists, we have our own DEXA scans, docs, you have your MRIs, your ultrasounds, all the rest of it. Physiologists have ways perhaps of quantifying certain things now through biodata. But really, how reliable is that data? What does it mean? What does it tell us? Is it individualized? Is it helping us individualize something? And in a lot of ways for nutrition, a lot of the information that's around at the moment that we get, it's not actually helping us to personalize very much. It's not what I would call a plug-in and play device. Like you get in a car, you plug something in, it tells you all the problems, you pull the plug out and you deal with the problems. Okay, it's not a complete diagnostic. We've also got other challenges in nutrition as well. We've got very, very poor indicators of information such as hair samples. We've got various bloods, urine, salivas being used, some of which have good, strong evidence, and others are very, very weak, which people just latch on to try and sell something, unfortunately. But they're very good at marketing, so those things do tend to succeed. We've also got other marketed things like food intolerance testing, which has no scientific basis at all. But when you break all this down, can we do our fundamentals right in sports nutrition? And the fundamentals are, what do we know the guys eat? How do we track food? And it's really complicated. There's no easy way to do it unless you follow people around. So we've got a bit of a problem in getting information to inform our decisions. But technology's moving. We are going towards personalized nutrition through the use of genetics, for example. But again, to clarify, this isn't just a swab in a mouth and it tells you everything you need to know about a person's nutrition, because those things are out on the market. Okay? The level that we're at very much on an evidence base to do with nutrition and genes is simply at the moment to look at caffeine and possibly the positive or negative effects of caffeine on our athletes, and what this might mean in terms of some recommendations. But even these are pretty much flawed. So when it comes to personalised nutrition, thank you, doctor, in the audience. When it comes to personalised nutrition, there's no substitute actually with working individually with a motivated athlete who's going to give you the details and do the things that you actually want. And these are two examples where there has to be a lot of planning and periodization involved, not only in training but also nutrition. The Marathon des Sables and this event where people run, bike, swim from Marble Arch to the Arc de Triomphe, which only 6 people have actually succeeded. We've got one athlete in Qatar who's going to be doing that, hopefully next year. So the take-home message number 3, the omics are coming. Nutrigenomics, I can't say it, are coming. We need to keep an eye on it. But technology, simple swab diagnostic stuff is way, way away. It's not there. And we need to be very careful on using bloods with poor reliability and validity to making snap decisions to do with health and, more importantly, our performance. So I have a question as well, really, for the Aspetar audience. So when things do come out, at what time do we decide to actually use them? And this isn't necessarily just for nutrition, but it's also actually for quite a lot of things that we do. So there could be new and innovative things come out which are really shown to have positive benefits in other areas, which could have individual uses in some of our practice. So this is continuous blood glucose monitoring, which I've used before in my practice back in the UK with certain athletes complaining of certain sort of symptoms around performance. But we've got the likes of the microbiome and using stools to look at the gut. That evidence is out there now, and Dr. Satina's starting to look at diabetes, but the evidence is out there about the importance of microbiome. And the final one is, what about technology? I mean, certain things about ultrasound and glycogen levels are not there yet, and myself, Rod, Marco, we've all had a look at these bits of kit. They're not there yet. But when you start getting messages like this pushed out on social media, you do start to get a bit of pressure from other places on getting those things in-house to start using them, because other people might be using them, or to try and get ahead of the curve. So if we're trying to be leaders, at what point do we come in before we start to bring something into our practice? Because we don't want to be here. That's not good. We want to be informed in our practice and ideally evidence-based, but where does that come? So I think that's a really interesting question that we need to ask within our practice, within our disciplines, not only in sports nutrition, but at what time do we bring these things in to try and help our athletes and at the same time achieve Aspetar vision and mission. So where are the opportunities? There's lots of them. Lots of them. The ones I've highlighted are ones that I think are really relevant to our current practice within Aspetar. I think in terms of sports nutrition, we don't know the effect of chronic injury on athlete health, and I think we should be looking at that. Let's take an example of current practice at the moment, things like even like vitamin D, iron, we take that during screening, but screening can be sometimes a long way away from an athlete gets a chronic injury. What we're doing to retest, what we're doing to treat, what we're doing to intervene during the injury period when these nutrients have a significant effect on the healing phases. And also we don't really know anything about our elite adolescent population and nutrition. And there's obviously lots of ethical, issues to do with, doing research in kids. But let's take a simple one. This handsome chap here, I think carries off this bit of software a lot better than that guy there. This is a bit of eye tracking software that we used in Aspire Academy canteen as we look to develop it and refurb it to see where our athletes and staff actually look, so that where we put our messages, our digital signage and our prompts to try and improve choices, habits, we put those in the right places. Now, in terms of ethics, that's quite low on the agenda, but we could still do it. There's still nothing out there. This is technology that's previously used in the supermarkets to get you understanding where you look to sell you messages and put their key products they want to sell you right in those eye shots. But now they're starting to be used in elite sport as well, to be doing with skill acquisition and decision making. So these are all bits of technology which may not actually be in our realms, but are starting to be used in elite sport, and we could start to do some really nice bits of research to inform our practice and others' practice as well. In terms of how sports nutrition could impact health and what my colleagues think, these are some of the things which you're going to see coming across the bottom. It's a little bit quick, I'm sorry, but basically they would like to see sort of more performance versus health kind of labeling. And interestingly, towards the last bit of this talk, they really do start to see advertising as a key area and involving industry as a way to changing current habits of health of athletes. This lady here presented at a Tuesday morning lecture on the old, what was called female athlete triad, or what is now called REDS. She presented here, I guess, about a year ago. but we're missing a trick really in that we're not promoting good messages through athletes to try and impact on our next generation. And when I say we, I don't mean Aspetar, I mean IOC, I mean FIFA, I mean organizations which are absolutely huge, which in my opinion could be doing some really nice work to help us as practitioners on the front line engage, especially with the younger athletes, with the minimum amount of work possible. At the moment, we've got to do our own video clips. We've got to do it's all our own cost, everything, which makes it doubly hard, doubly time consuming, and take twice as long. So if we had a little bit more of coordination in the organizations, I'm pretty sure we could do a better job. And what do I mean about that? Well, here's an example. So Lewis Hamilton has gone vegan, which is obviously the reason why he's going to be world champion. But what can we make from this? Well, we're not saying everyone's got to go vegan, but we know from the stats I've showed you, we have cholesterol problems in our athletes. Okay, we have cardiovascular problems, in our athletes. We could be using some positive messages to do with plants to push certain things to improve the health of our athletes using this dude here. Okay. So my take-home message, I've got two from this particular one. We do definitely need to know more about our athletes. There's no two ways about that. And we are working towards trying to do that. And if you really want another one, a simple one, tell your athletes that. Because that's essentially it. That's what we're finding. So I'm just conscious of time. So I'd like to move on to the threats, just for the last section. This is quite a biggie. Where we get our information is really important. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like nutrition for everyone having an opinion and an expertise and a view. And that's in every club, organization, whether it be a media organization, an elite sport organization, a hospital. Everyone has a view from all disciplines on nutrition. So I think we have to be very clear and we have to be very careful and mindful about, where our athletes and other staff are getting their sources of information from. And this was a stat that was put out by a colleague, Louise Burke, a good few months ago now, that 59% of the stuff on nutrition that goes onto Twitter isn't actually from anyone who's qualified. This is where our guys get the information. What does that mean? Knock on to number 2. We get a lot of bridging from health research to performance. We get a lot of technical terms added to the word nutrition to try and make it sexy, to try and make it appealing. And the reality is, it's just marketing, because stuff, it just works in the same way. Okay. What does that lead to? That leads to a whole heap of confusion. And a bit of a busy slide, but a heck of a challenge to try and talk about low carbs, high fat in one slide. But I'll give it a go. So, by definition, the word diet suggests something that we do every single day. Do we really want that with our athletes? What perception, what message are they taking from some of this research? Are they starting to think that people should be on low carb or high fat diets all the time? And the reality is, the two are very different, just as training on low carbohydrate or low muscle glycogen are very different and give very different effects physiologically. And essentially what I'm coming to there is that a high fat diet, it may make you lose a bit of weight, but it's going to really sacrifice top end performance. That's been shown time and time again over the last couple of months, peer reviewed research. So on one hand, the approach might look at health in terms of certain metrics to do with health, perhaps blood sugar control, cholesterol, but really it's not healthy, because if our athletes take it as this is something they've got to do all the time, they're actually potentially compromising their health by making them more prone to illness and injury when they do intense exercise. We have a problem with industry. There are now three areas of nutrition, this being the new one. There's a massive investment in industry and nutrition. Big companies are buying up nutrition companies. And why they want to do that is they want to actually start to market the health market more, this market. They want the people like you and me who try to get the most out of doing very little. So what does that mean? Blurring of the lines. The protein Mars bar being a classic, okay? Add protein, it's even got more sugar in than a normal Mars bar, but it's got the word protein with it. So the word appeal to an athlete or the general population is protein is healthy, therefore I can eat it. That's an issue. Fat water, you know, an extension of bulletproof coffee. It's out there, you know, it's out there. Coconut oil being added into water, you know, and that's an extension of the high fat stuff that's coming out. These are the products now which, you know, industry are latching onto to make some money, which are causing some real issues. And finally, you know, we can't really go anywhere without looking at advertising and the role that our athletes are playing in endorsing certain products which aren't actually improving athlete health. In this particular study, in 2013, they looked at athletes and endorsement. They found that the second highly most endorsed product group was nutrition, and of 60 odd products that were marketed by athletes, 57 of them were high energy, low nutrient dense products. So on one hand, we're trying to improve athlete health, but we've got a lot of things conspiring against us. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts in time for some questions. I think that's quite a good way to sum up the diet side of things. If I were to pull together the take-home messages that I've suggested across this presentation, these would be them. And if I were to be in a position to start to put a wiki together, I would probably make it what I see and know is this. So that brings the end of my presentation. I'd just really like to say thanks to a couple of people in the audience who have helped me put this presentation together. I'm obviously just one of a lot of people in Aspetar, and like everywhere I work, I find it fascinating that I can just, you know, go down a corridor, knock on a door, and I've got an expert that I can ask some questions to and get some information at the drop of a hat. So I really am very grateful for the support that's gone into producing this talk. Thank you very much.